Welcome, everyone. This is the AMA/Q&A with David Brown, also known as Accounts Playable. So we're going to spend about an hour and a half today answering your questions, any questions you might have. But to get started, I think, David, maybe we can just have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as JY said, my name's David. Accounts Playable on the forum, and I took the LSAT twice. And the most recent LSAT I took was the June 2016 test, and I was lucky enough to score a 174. I'm a little unique in the law school admissions process in that I applied to law schools last cycle, and then I got some acceptances, some rejections, and then I decided, for a variety of reasons, which I have a feeling I'll get into with some questions tonight about why I did that. I decided to reapply again this cycle, and so far it's just kind of short run. The reapplying has not been a detriment, so something to consider, something we can talk about later today. I went through the 7Sager curriculum, so I'm a 7Sager curriculum alum. I owe a ton of things to 7Sager and the community, and JY in particular, for helping me through the LSAT, and really my score improvement from my first LSAT to my second LSAT really was attributed to the curriculum and really the great community that 7Sager offers. So again, something else we can talk about later, just how to use the curriculum and things like that, just to kind of give some people some things to think about with what to ask. But that's kind of a little bit of background on myself. I'll throw it back to JY if he wants to add anything else, and we can get started.
Yeah, I think maybe let's first talk about. Sorry, I'm just trying to mute everybody who's joining because I think I heard some background noise. But first, I wanted you to talk about your LSAT score. What did you start with? How much did you improve your first time? What did you do different? Specifically, what did you do on 7Sager that was different that helped you get your 174?
Yeah, so my LSAT journey was a little bit unique, and I talk about it. I actually did a webinar for 7Sager back in, I can't believe it's over a year, back in October of 2016. I did a webinar that kind of touched a little bit about sort of my LSAT journey and ways to study right. So I recommend if you guys have the time to go and watch that. But sort of the general gist of sort of my story was I took a diagnostic test, and I scored. I didn't really take a true diagnostic test, but if I had to guess, I guess it was in the maybe high 140s, maybe low 150s, somewhere around there. So I certainly didn't come to the LSAT with really a leg up on anything. I'd never taken a logic course or anything like that in college, and so I really started at sort of ground zero. And sort of that summer, when I first started studying for the LSAT, I sort of did everything sort of the wrong way. Like I really breezed through practice tests without really sufficiently reviewing them. I rushed a lot, and I sort of deluded myself into thinking I was really ready to take the test. And surprise, surprise, I took the September 2014 test. I think it was the 2014 test. Yeah, September 2014 test, and I scored a 161. And given just sort of my expectations, given to where I wanted to test, it just wasn't a reflection of what I thought my ability was. And so I took a step back and sort of reevaluated how I approached the test. I got a lot more active with 7Sager, and I sort of took that year. I was in my master's program, and I finished my master's, didn't look anything for the LSAT, and sort of that summer after my master's degree, I really hit 7Sager hard. And one core key thing I did was really get involved. I would try to try to type out comments on almost every video in the core curriculum. I tried to ask any question I had right in the forums. when it came to a video explanation during my blind review, if I didn't feel 100% or close to it about a question, I would type out an explanation. For logical reasoning, I would start with the paraphrase of my argument. I would get into what I think the answer should be. Then I would analyze the answer choices, and I would say, this is why I selected this. So I spent probably most of my prep, really during most of my blind review process, in fact, typing out explanation after explanation after explanation. And it really solidified the reasoning that the LSAT has in my brain. It solidified sort of the testing techniques, how to approach problems in a similar way. And I'd say that was one big aspect of my improvement was sitting there and typing out explanations, and doing that helped me score that 174 in June.
Yeah, I've read a lot of your explanations, and I think it feels to me like at times they were cathartic as well. It gets kind of emotional when you're struggling with some of these questions.
Yeah, I get this. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, and sometimes that's good. Like I had not related to the LSAT, but when I was a kid, like I was very much involved in sports, and I had like a coach, my soccer coach, and I was one of those really competitive kids when it came to soccer and swimming and all that. And if I didn't win, yeah, I'd get mad. And so one time coach pulled me aside and he goes, you know what, it's fine to get mad, right? What's not fine is to get mad and then not do anything about it. And it's something I kind of took to heart, and it's something to sort of, in my reflection about the LSAT, was, you know what, it's fine to get mad with the test, right? It's going to happen. It's inevitable. You're going to look at a question, the answer choice, you're going to pick answer choice B, the correct answer is going to be answer choice C, and you're just going to look at it and go, what are they talking about? And there's no possible way that's the right answer, and I'm right, and yada, yada, yada. But that's half of it, right? The other half of it is then having to come to the realization that, okay, you're wrong here, right? And how do you improve? And for me, it was typing out an explanation, and yeah, showing the sort of pathos and the emotion sometimes in the not so good days was relaxing sometimes, but it still was a mechanism to improve, because I still had to sit there and analyze, all right, there was an error in my reasoning here. What am I going to do about it? Right. And that was sort of my check against myself. That was the check against myself to get, complacent or lazy, because it's so easy. And I was definitely guilty of this early in my prep of just, oh yeah, I picked B, the answer choice is C. Okay, that's good. I'm moving on, without spending the time to sit there and reflect on the question, and forcing, quote unquote, forcing myself to type out an explanation made me really take a step back and analyze my reasoning, right? Analyze my thought process. And it made it so much easier to find mistakes, and it made it so much easier to go back and review, because with every typed out explanation was a snapshot in time of my reasoning at one point. And there were tons of times where I would redo questions and I'd go, man, how did I think about this question 2 months ago? And I'd have a document, I'd have a record of it, and I can go back and see, improvement. Hey, I missed this question 2 months ago, but I got this question correct now. And you can look at that delta, like, hey, I was totally off base 2 months ago, and now I'm not. And the explanations really helped with that process.
Yeah. It's I think just such a great way to safeguard against our tendencies to fool ourselves. As when you're reviewing, and generally if you don't write anything out or type anything out, or if you're not reviewing, or if you're not being forced to explain the question to someone else, you don't have any guardrails. You kind of just look at the question and you feel like, okay, well, I get it, but do you really get it? Like, are you not going to make the same mistake again? That's the important. Those are the important questions, right? Because it doesn't matter if you got this question right. It's a prep test. It doesn't count.
Yeah, exactly. The important part is sort of minimizing the same mistake. Minimizing the number of times you make the same mistake twice.
Right.
Right. And, and again, we're all human. We're all going to sometimes, we're going to make the same mistakes again sometimes. But that was one sort of, if there was ever a benefit to, and again, I'm not advocating for this at all, but if there ever was a benefit for breezing through the prep test and quote, wasting the prep test like I did when I first started, it was when I had to rely a lot on my retakes. One sort of benefit that actually had on my blind review was I could compare what my first score was, my sort of fresh take score was versus what my retake score was. And if I found that I was missing the same questions on that second time, I knew I hadn't really analyzed the test that first time, sufficiently. Or I knew that there was ways to improve. So, definitely don't waste your prep tests, because they are, I know there's 80 something now, but they really are a precious commodity to be sort of savored and taken when they're value add to take them and when they're sufficiently reviewed. But just because you've used all of your prep tests, it's not damning, right? Yeah. There was never a single prep test I took where I got every single question right, on a retake, right? And that was always, I always looked at it as an opportunity, going, okay, there's something even on this retake test, I can learn something. I missed this question again. I not only missed it the first time when I saw it on fresh eyes, I missed it again right after I'd even spent all that time reviewing it. And then even tests I took 3 times. Sometimes I would miss a question a 3rd time, and there was always something to sort of drill down further with any test. And if you can minimize the mistakes, the same mistake, if you can minimize the number of times you do the same mistake twice, the better off you're just going to be. And the whole blind review process and typing out explanations, I think, is, at least for me, it was the most efficient way I could sort of identify those sorts of errors and try to correct them long term.
Yeah, that's a really good. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's what you just mentioned is a very good way to find out how effective your blind review was. Right, which is to just wait a couple months, like take the same test again, so it's a retake, and see how many questions you miss. Right, theoretically, you should be getting a 180 because you blind reviewed everything. You already know the answers. You supposedly worked out all the logic, right? So you're not just like memorizing a string of letters, right?
Yeah.
Plus, It's been like a long time, so it's like you're really not going to remember. So yeah, that's a really good. And then if there are any faults in the way you think about certain things, it'll show up on the retake, and those are going to be glaring faults, right? Because
yeah, exactly. Because that was the way I always looked at it, was missing a question on a retake, right, or missing a question on, say, a 3rd take. That sort of would create its own priority. A lot of sort of people that I talk to, on 7Sager or just about the LSAT in general, a constant, and almost everybody's gonna ask the question at some point in their prep, what do I prioritize, right? Do I prioritize games? Do I prioritize my state of mind? Do I prioritize logical reasoning? And I think the answer is mostly different. Is going to be different for pretty much everybody, but if you're just looking at it from, I think, just a straight data perspective on, at the end of the day, the whole point of the LSAT is you got to get questions right. And if you don't know where to sort of start, and you're far enough along in your prep where you're taking prep tests, taking retakes of prep tests, a really good place to start is looking at those areas where you've made the same mistake again. That creates its own sort of internal priority where, hey, I missed question 5 on section 2 twice. I missed it 2 months ago. I blind reviewed it, and then now 2 months later when I retook it, I missed it again. And that's a really good starting point, I think, when it comes to what you should maybe drill, or trying to do a little meta analysis. I'm like, okay, am I really taking the test or reviewing in an efficient manner? And I think that sort of takes a higher priority than a lot of other things, right? It's all about value add, and if you're making the same mistake twice, that to me is a very valuable. It's very valuable to spend your time trying to correct that, as opposed to maybe other things where you sort of lower priority items. If that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That does. And it's because you look at a retake, you look at a retake, and a retake underreports your errors,
Yeah,
right? In other
yeah,
words, a retake will mask a lot of your weaknesses because it's a retake, because you have seen the test before and seen the logic before. Who knows if the logic showed up in a different, the same logic, but this time it's about, um, I don't know, a sailing ship, right? Versus
yeah,
previously it was about a bus. Like, who knows if you will recognize it? So a retake only masks errors and underreports errors. So if that's in that context, an error arises, then you know to take that error very, very seriously.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that's good. That's really good. That is something. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people do say, like, unfortunately they don't they do burn through a lot of prep tests too quickly, and they end up having just a handful of prep tests, fresh prep tests left. So retakes are helpful for that. Um, I have a Yeah. Sorry. Go
And
ahead.
the thing about the prep test is I think a common sentiment that I find talking with people is, oh my God, you're so screwed if all you have are retakes, and that's just patently false,
Yeah.
right? And it's, again, like, the retakes are a really good gauge of, okay, am I making the same mistake twice? And if so, okay, that's a whole priority. And we sort of just talked
Hmm.
about that. But
Hmm.
they're also really good practice, right? To test, right? Are you taking the test the same way, test to test? They're also really good. Retakes are really good to experiment a little bit. So there was always there. Yeah, in an ideal world, when I first started studying for the LSAT, would I have saved maybe 10 or 20 uh, prep tests that I would have looked at, that I would have saved in case I needed to retake? Of course I would. But, I didn't know what I was doing at first, and I didn't do that. But I never felt I was at a huge disadvantage um, when I was retaking them, despite sometimes not occasionally not having maybe the best gauge of what my score was,
Hmm.
right? Because Jay was right. If you when you retake a test, your score is going to be inflated, and how indicative of how much that score inflation is, might be a matter of debate, but it's at least inflated, and so it's hard sometimes to gauge a lot of useful information about your retake score. But I always felt that the blind review was the blind review process on the retake was the bulk of the learning process.
Yeah.
So even if I didn't feel like I could trust my score, I felt like I could trust what I was doing in blind review with sort of my method of blind review, where I was still learning a lot, and I could see that tangible, that improvement, by comparing uh, a written explanation I had 2 months ago versus an explanation that a new explanation that I wrote, and I can compare them, right? And I can
Yeah.
look and see, okay, how have I improved? And that to me was enough to know uh, when I was sort of ready to take the LSAT. I delayed taking the LSAT, you know, over the course of when I got back into studying in that August when I started studying again after my master's. And one big reason why I kept postponing it was because I couldn't see enough of a change between where I was testing and where I was currently testing. And then it got to the point to where, okay, yeah, I think I'm ready to go. And I killed it. I was correct in that assessment,
Hmm.
and I didn't really feel like I was ever at a huge disadvantage with relying mostly on retakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, just in case anyone leaves this conversation uh, with a slightly altered message, I just want to clarify. It's it's still not it's not the best situation to be in,
Yeah, it's
to
definitely
be
less than
without. Yeah, it's less. It's like worse than if you have fresh pep tests. So it's
yeah.
not just like it's not damning.
And yeah,
It's yeah.
JY is absolutely right. You definitely don't want to burn through your prep test. Like it definitely was, an issue that I couldn't reliably figure out my score that often, because when I started back into studying for the LSAT, I think I only had about 5 or 6. I could be off by it. I need to sit and think about it. But I think I only had roughly about 5 like fresh tests. So they were very, very precious to me. Like when I needed to take a fresh test, it needed to be like, yeah, I need to know what my score is, so I can see where my improvement is, right? Where my improvement was. But in between them, when it was sort of like, all right, every, for 4 weeks, take retakes, and then take, take 4 tests, then a fresh test, take 4 tests, then a fresh test. I felt like those 4 in between, there still was a lot I was learning, and that's kind of where I'm sort of accentuating right that point is, those 4 tests in between, maybe the fresh test that I was taking, I still was learning a ton about the test. I was learning a ton about myself. I was learning a ton about, was I employing the right timing strategy? Was I addressing these questions correctly? Was I really doing the blind review the right way? And that helped me a lot. That helped me prepare myself for my fresh test, because I could use those retakes also to experiment a little bit, to figure out, right, can I make an efficiency gain here, an efficiency gain here? And so that's kind of what I mean, where I didn't feel like I was at a disadvantage from that standpoint. Now, best case scenario is you're sort of perpetually taking fresh tests at a rate that you're not sort of wasting them, right? So retakes are good, I think, intermittently throughout the study process, right? I don't really think every test you should take needs to be sort of fresh tests, and I think you should also take 10 or 15 if you have access to all the exams. Put them aside, put them under your mattress in case the world falls apart. You need to retake once or twice. You still have a healthy set of fresh exams. But if that's not you, like, don't feel like you're totally screwed, right? If you're just relying on retakes, because as evidenced by me, that wasn't the case. Especially if you review them correctly, and if you really analyze what you're doing them and doing with them the right way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. If people here aren't familiar with accounts payables write-ups underneath the lessons, and not just the core curriculum lessons, but also the video explanation lessons, I highly encourage you guys to, let's say you just took prep test 47 and you're blind reviewing and then you're watching the videos. I highly recommend you scroll through the comments to find David's comments. They're very well written, very well thought out. And more than that, I think it's just exemplary of what everyone should be doing as well, right? Like, reading other people's comments is one thing, but it's quite another to force yourself to write your own. We mentioned this earlier. They're guardrails against your inclination, against your natural tendency to kind of be lazy and fool yourself into thinking that you get it, right? Like I don't write it out. I don't write out explanations very much, but obviously I make video explanations, and sometimes I host blind review calls. And like, part of the motivation for those things is precisely to put guardrails against my own tendencies to be lazy, right? Like I'll take a prep test and I'll just, I'll be like, yeah, I think I get it. And then, like, through talking to other people, or through having to, plan out a video lesson, I realized, oh, there's actually a lot more to this answer choice that I just so offhandedly dismissed, or I thought was so obvious, right? There's a lot more subtlety to this particular question. So that's the kind of depth of understanding. That's the kind of, like, juice you can squeeze out of a question. Before, like, just kind of discarding it and moving on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys should definitely feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. I'll just I'll call on you guys to ask. So I think here we have a question from Tyler. Tyler, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Hey, JY. Hey, David.
Hi, Tyler.
Hey, Tyler, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Ready for your dogs?
Yes, I am. I'm so used to losing. It doesn't matter. We're here. I'll take the money. I know most people don't care because it's an SEC final, but that's all right. Thanks for asking. Hey, one thing that I've heard you talk about in the past about when you were actually sitting down to do the blind review process. From what I have done in the study group calls and everything else, a lot of people will go through and do specifically LR straight through and do a blind review of each question. And if I remember correctly, I've heard you mention that you did it a different way.
Yeah, so you're talking about, you know what, I can just explain. I'll just go through my blind review.
Yeah, I don't want to speak the turn because I liked how you did it.
Yeah, I'll just restate it. So I think I'll go. I'll probably say too much, but I'll just explain my whole blind review process. So I tried not to take more than one exam a week. Because I tried at some point taking 3, and then I was like, oh my god, 3 is way too many. That didn't last very long. Then I went back down to 2, and I didn't think I could blind review 2 in a week. So I tried only to take 1 exam a week, and once it became apparent I was going to take the June test, which is 1 o'clock on a Monday. At least it was when I took it. I think that's still the case, but I would do my best to take the exam on a Monday at 1 o'clock. I try to wake up, eat my breakfast, sort of do the things I was going to do on test day. I would try to make my Monday just like replicate test day. And so I would start my test at 1. I would take the test from, I don't know, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, whatever, how long it took. I would try to take a 5-section test to sort of test my endurance and all that. And that would be the only thing I would do Monday. Just take the test, right? And afterwards, I would go to the gym, have a martini, relax, right? Watch a movie or something, because I'd just be so burnt out taking the test, and I just couldn't get myself to do any review afterwards. And so Tuesday through Thursday was my blind review, and I would do I would try to do maybe 2 sections a day. And it didn't really matter which 2 sections I did. I sometimes would mix it up. So sometimes I would do LR and games. Sometimes I do reading comp and games. Sometimes I do LR and reading comp. It doesn't really matter as much. And so I would just do 2 sections a day. And for my blind review process for games, I would print out a fresh section of the games, and I would redo the game sort of one at a time. So I would have, so in other words, I'd have game 1. And I'd have like maybe my phone right next to me, and I'd hit the stopwatch on my phone. And so I would time myself, time myself, how long did I spend up front jotting down my rules, making my master game board, etc. And then once I was sort of done with that, I would pause my timer, jot down the time on my piece of paper, and then I would go into the questions. And I would then jot down, how long did I spend as a bulk on all of the questions. And once I was done with that first game, I would then check my answers, right? Just for that one game. And I would then, after I checked my answers, I would watch JY's video to see, okay, did I approach the game correctly? Or did he say something in the video that I missed? Was there some inference that I missed? So I'd always like to sort of check my work with JY's game video. And I would do this even on games that I got 100% correct, because maybe there was something I missed, right? Some inference I should have made and didn't, right? And maybe it cost me 30 seconds somewhere. So I always very religiously watched JY's videos for pretty much every section, as you'll sort of see as I explain my other 2 sections too. But that was sort of my logic on that. And any game that gave me a problem, and I defined problem in the most liberal sense, that I missed a question, or I was over time, or I just thought it was a really unique or weird game. Some of the games in between prep tests 1 and 35 are kind of weird, and by the time I was scheduled to take the June test, a couple tests had kind of come back and asked sort of weird game types, and I felt like it was sort of valuable to sort of go back and practice those. So any sort of game that I felt any modicum of trouble, I'd put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and I would try to recycle through that Excel spreadsheet maybe once every 2 weeks, right? So as the spreadsheet got longer with the game lists in it, I would just try to print off, and in my sort of free time, if I was at a doctor's office, or I was at the DMV or whatever, I'd maybe whip out my piece of paper, and I'd try to, if I had 10 minutes, I'd do a game, right? So that was sort of my games blind review process. my logical reasoning process, what I would do is I would go through the questions I circled during the test, and I would try to keep my circles. I was never very good at this, and I'll admit that. But I would try to sort of limit my circles, but I always found myself very underconfident, and that I think I tended to circle questions, way too many questions than I maybe should have. But that was sort of something I tried to correct over the long term, and I maybe could have done a bit better job doing it when I was studying. But be that as it may, during my blind review, I would go through the questions that I circled. And so say I circled question 5, right? I would start with question 5. I would redo the question from scratch, right? And I would, pick my answer. Not at all. I'm not looking at my original take. I sort of have a new, fresh set of this too. Right? I do question 5 again. And then I would sit there and I would type out an explanation. So before I've done any sort of analysis on whether the question was correct or incorrect, I would type out my explanation, right? And you can kind of use my explanations template on so many questions, throughout the curriculum and throughout the prep tests in the curriculum. And after I was done typing out my explanation, I then check my answer and watch JY's video, sort of for the same reason that I would I'd do that for the games, to see, okay, was there something I missed, right? How did JY interpret it, or was there a comment already in the logical reasoning section? I sometimes read those too, and I would do that for every question I circled. And then once I did that, I would then check that section, right? So then I would look and see, okay, were there any questions that I missed that I hadn't circled, right? Because I was checking questions, right? I was checking my circled questions as I was going along, right? But then at the end of that section, I'd then go back and I'd see, okay, say I missed question 17 and I hadn't circled 17. I'd then go and try to address that right then and there, because I'm sort of I was in the logical reasoning mindset. And I would do it sort of in the same way as I had done my other ones, except I was a little bit more strict with myself on questions that I missed and hadn't circled. I would spend a lot more time on those, because they were questions that had fooled me, sort of 2 times, right? If you circle a question, you kind of have a feeling that maybe I missed it. I sort of am uneasy about it. But a question I hadn't circled, was something that just flat out fooled me. And so I would try to spend a lot of time on those if those ever arose. And then finally, for my reading comprehension, I would blind review it a lot like I would blind review games. I would print out a fresh section of reading comprehension. I would look at reading passage 1, and I would have my phone next to me, and I'd time, all right, how long did it take me to read the passage? And then I would take a step back, and then I would fill out, and if you go to the reading comp sections for, I think, pretty much every test from like 35 to 72 or 3 or whatever, you can kind of see my summary comment that I make about every passage between those prep tests. And so I encourage all of you to go and read those, and maybe take my bare bones skeleton and use that going forward for your reading comp blind review. But I would fill out that template. It would be, what was the summary of paragraph 1? What was the summary of paragraph 2? What was the main point of the passage? What was my author's tone? What was the reasoning structure of the passage? And I would do this all by memory. I would try my best not to look back at the passage, because I would try to practice, okay, do I remember I spent 3.5 minutes reading this? Can I answer these sort of structural questions or structural points by memory? And so I'd spend time typing that out. Then I would get into the questions, right? And like games, I'd have my phone next to me, and I would time how long did it take me to do all of the questions, right? And at the end of that,
Can I ask a quick follow-up in that regard?
Yeah.
Thank you. When you were setting the stopwatch, are you just gauging your internal time clock to make sure that you're watching the time, or are you trying to do it test taking time?
Yeah, so yes, that's a good question. So for both the games and for reading comprehension, I was going at the pace that I would go during a regular time section. So it just was so in other words, the watch was sort of next to me, just so I could just have a data point, hit stop and say, okay, how long did that take me, right? If it took, I would try to read the passage in really no more than 3.5 minutes. depending on the passage difficulty, and I would try to answer the questions in about 3 or 4 minutes, right? Depending on the difficulty of the questions, how many questions, and if I found myself like way under or way over, I would kind of note that, and I'll get to sort of what I would do with this sort of notes at the end. But it was just an extra data point, right? If I was really going way over, I had some sort of way over with time. I had some sort of way to I had evidence of that, right? In other words, because sometimes you can feel like you're going fast, sometimes you can feel like you're going slow, but you're really not. And having the watch in front of me for blind review was helpful for me in that regard. But going back to the questions, so I'd answer the questions, and then at the end of that, I would then take a step back and I would go through the questions again, but this time I would try to justify my answer choice with a line reference. So in other words, I've done all of the questions in reading comp for that first passage, right? And I've done it, but without looking back at the text, right? Because again, I want to practice my memory. I want to practice, okay, can I answer the questions without going back? Because going back to the passage is such a time sink, right? It's something to where you just don't want to do it on your initial read through. But then I would go back and I would look at my line reference. I'd say, okay, I picked answer choice C. Can I really quickly find where maybe answer choice C is, right, in the passage? So say answer choice C is line 27. I'd put a little 27 next to C. So that way when I check my answers, I have some sort of, not only my sort of gut answer, which wasn't looking at the passage, I also have, okay, this is actual textual line support, right? In case, I need to type out an explanation for whatever reason. So I would do that for all the questions. Then I would go and I'd watch JY's video of him reading the passage. And again, I would sort of compare that to my type summary. Then I would watch the video explanations for the questions, and I'd be grading them as he's going along. And any question, again, that I missed, or any question that sort of gave me trouble, I would type out an explanation. And so that would be passage 1. And then I would rinse and repeat for passage 2, rinse and repeat for passage 3, rinse and repeat for passage 4. So that was my blind review from Tuesday through Thursday, which were, extensive time, a few hours a day, sort of doing that. And then Friday was sort of my reflection day. I would take the data that I had gathered about timing, or if I had recorded a video of myself, taking a section, which also helped me sort of gauge my timing strategy and stuff. And I would use that and ask myself a series of questions like, okay, did I take the test efficiently, right? Does the video that I took of me taking a logical reasoning section indicate that I had enough time to go back and look at the questions I circled? During blind review, the time I was taking, reading the questions and answering the questions, reading the passage, answering the questions, was that efficient, right? And if not, then I would sort of tailor my my drilling strategies to that. The other thing I would ask myself, like, okay, was there anything that just gave me problems, right? Did I miss, right, 2 necessary assumption questions, right? Or did I find myself really struggling with weakening questions? Or, man, I hadn't seen an in-out game in forever, and the in-out game in this test really gave me issues. Maybe I want to drill, 5 to 10 in-out games today. So I would use my Friday to be sort of my ad hoc sort of strategic drilling based off this week's prep test. And Saturday was sort of the same thing. Anything I didn't finish Friday, I'd do Saturday. Then I would try to take Sundays off, and then Monday would be my next test. So that was kind of my blind review process in a nutshell. So I hope that did answer your question, Tyler.
I think you did.
Yeah, I think I did too. So.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
So where do we start? Let's see. I'll just start at the top. I'll try to get through all of these questions if possible. So someone asked, where do you start when you're restarting your studies after a long break from studying?
Where do I start? Yeah, so I started. So after I took
I think they might mean like the proverbial you, like where would one start?
Like sort of so like if you have like sort of you've taken a break and like where to come back, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say one thing to do is take a take a retake test, right? And maybe even take the last retake, maybe even take a retake of the last prep test you took, right? If you're in the prep test stage. If you're not in the prep test stage, and I would say a really good place to start would just be, back at the core curriculum, or back sort of with the fundamentals. But if you're sort of already in the prep test stages of your prep, I'd say start with the last test you took or last test you took and take that one again, right? And sort of note differences, right? Because I think most of the time people take breaks because they're burnt out. And it's because, man, I'm just sick and tired of taking practice tests. I'm just sick and tired of looking at the LSAT, day in and day out for XYZ number of weeks. And sort of picking up where you left off in that regard, I think can sort of really help you solidify where you need to prioritize your studies, right? It kind of goes back to what we said earlier about, if you're doing the retake and you're still missing the same questions after line review, that's a really good, that's a really good starting point because it's already prioritized for. Like, hey, I missed question 5 2 times. Question 5 is a necessary assumption question. Maybe I'm not so hot on necessary assumptions, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I need to go and review those, right? Or, hey, I missed, I did this in-out game on this prep test 2 months or a month ago or 3 weeks ago. And I just did this in-out game again, and I still struggled through it. Maybe that means I'm not too hot on in-out games. Maybe that's a really good place to start, in-out games. So I think retaking a pretty fresh exam is a really good place to start because it's already going to be prioritized for you depending on how you do.
Right. Yeah. Jack, you asked a couple of questions. Is your mic working?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, how are you?
How are y'all doing?
Doing well.
All right, so just to get started, I wanted to ask, I'm having trouble trying to find the time and motivation to really sit down and work out. Well, I've taken a cold diagnostic, but starting spring semester, obviously I have a full class load. I'm trying to graduate a year early, so I'm taking 16 hours and I'll be graduating in spring, and I'm trying to schedule for June and I'm skipping February, but I'm just trying to wonder where I'll be able to find the time to sit down between school, classes, homework, and an internship.
Yeah, so time management. So I would say right now, so you only get one shot at your undergraduate GPA, right? And I would say prioritizing stuff with the LSAT is for the most part fairly compartmentalized. Like when you're an undergrad, I would recommend get your GPA as high as you can get, because once you're out of college, right, and you're going to be a young guy, right, because you're going to graduate early, right, so you're going to have plenty of time to study for the LSAT after you graduate if need be. So I would say prioritize your GPA, and then anything you can sort of do LSAT wise should kind of be secondary to that. But if you're really hell-bent on taking the LSAT in June and taking the LSAT or studying for the LSAT while you study, I would just budget time. I'd say, I have so many hours in the day. I go to class from say 10 to 2 or whatever. I got to get your undergrad homework done first, right? Get your projects done, get your group meetings done first, because again, I think your priority should be your undergrad GPA. But then try to find maybe a 2-hour chunk of time sometime in the day, whether it's before class, whether it's after class, and that 2-hour chunk of time, just be very, very efficient, right? Go through the core, because it sounds like you're just now starting your LSAT prep. And I think 2.5 hours a day of going through the core curriculum, reading, reading the comments on those videos, watching those videos, taking notes, and getting a really good fundamental stuff down by the time for the first say few months of your prep, because it's January, you're going to graduate in May. That's 4 months of doing that, right? And I think that's fine. And then I think from maybe, let me see, April until, the test is in June. April, I think 2 months of taking prep tests after that, sort of, depending on when your finals are. I think 2 months of practice exams is pretty good too. And, taking 1 or 2 prep tests a week for 2 months can be sufficient for a lot of people. So sort of, I know I was kind of all over the place on that, but I'd say priority should be undergrad GPA. But if you really want to study at the same time, I'd say just budget out 2 hours a day, right? And just say, okay, just no matter what I'm doing from 6 to 8 or from 7 to 9, I'm just going to do LSAT, and I'm going to do it right. I'm going to, turn my phone off. I'm going to turn the TV off, and I'm just going to do that and get a really good get your fundamentals down, right, while you're in undergrad. And then sort of at the end of the semester, right, before, at the end of the semester, then maybe start prep testing, right? And then, you got to study for finals and all that. And then after finals, get really into the prep testing mode until June. And I think that's probably your best bet. Now, I didn't really address the internship, but it's sort of the same philosophy there. Because I'm assuming your internship starts after you graduate, and kind of do that. You have your internship, say from 8 to 5. Say, okay, from 6 to wherever at night, I'm taking my prep test, and then the rest of the days of the week, I'm blind reviewing it, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense, Jack?
Yeah, I was going to say that the internships in duality with my spring semester. So I meant like I'll have classes and then I go to my internship and then I'll do my homework. So the internship goes hand in hand. But to a follow-up question with that, should I be focused more on like studying for a section I'm already good at and basically trying to zero that one out, or should I be working on a subject or a section that I'm weaker on? Like, should I be focusing on like logic games more because it's from what I hear, it's more of a learning like step to logical reasoning? I'm sorry, these questions are kind of weird, but like, is it easier to work on like logic games first as opposed to like logical reasoning, or do you have an opinion on that?
So the answer to that question is yes. Logic games is the most learnable part of the test, and it just comes with practice, right? So that answer is yes, at least in my experience. To answer your other question, I think it's better to hit the stuff that you're weaker on first, and then sort of manage the stuff you're still good at. So if you right now, so say for example, you're really good at games, and you're consistently, say right now, -2, -3, -4 on games, right? Still room for improvement, but you're pretty good. But then you're going -10, 12, 13, 14, 15 on reading comprehension. I say nip the reading comprehension stuff in the bud ASAP, because it's going to take you the longest to improve on that. And at the same time, you can, it's again, they're not mutually exclusive, right? You can be working on games sort of at the, same time as you're working on reading comprehension, right? You can do, an hour and a half of reading comprehension, and then, 30 minutes a game. 30 minutes a game is probably 2 or 3 games, plus their blind review, right? So I would say focus on the stuff you're weaker at, because that's gonna take more time to improve on, and manage the stuff you're good at to where it doesn't get rusty, if that makes sense. And then once you're at a spot to where you're pretty comfortable with all of the subjects, that's sort of what the prep tests I think are for, right? Then you can sort of put everything together, and as you're in the prep test phase, you can then focus on, okay, I really need to then hit home hone in on games, because I'm at a point of reading comp is at least manageable, or I'm at a point to where my logical reasoning is manageable. Now, while I'm prep testing, blind review should be, okay, how do I then put everything together and make that leap forward for the target score I want to get? Does that make sense?
Perfect. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thank you, David. Just one last thought, Jack. Sometimes you are just up against a hard limit. You only have 24 hours in a day, and it is just impossible to squeeze more time in. If you're graduating early, that actually gives you a time advantage. You could take a year off to do something and study for the LSAT. Maybe that'll be a better balance for you, and you won't start. And if you start law school at the age of 22, you'll still be below average in terms of age for your incoming class. So that is something to think about. as well. Okay, so next we have, I know we have a lot of questions. I am keeping track of them all, and I do want to get through all of them. So next, Anjali, is your mic working?
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good, thanks. I just wanted to ask if you could elaborate on applying to law schools twice, and if you could talk about, did you apply to the same schools the second time around, and also were you worried about rewriting a personal statement?
Yeah, so I did apply to all of the same schools twice. And so far, I've been readmitted to all of the schools I was admitted to last year. And I have 5 remaining schools that have not made decisions yet, but they haven't made decisions for anybody yet other than early decision applicants. So I don't feel like from an acceptance position, it hurt me to reapply, simply because I had some pretty compelling reasons why I was reapplying. So so I decided to take the additional year and sort of expand my job, right? I have a very nice job that I'm happy with, and had I gone to law school last year, I would have been at that position for just under a year. Whereas now I'm going to be, when I attend law school this August, I'm going to have pretty close to 2 years experience, right? And so from a professional standpoint, there's a lot more to sort of be leveraged there, I think, from an interview perspective during my 1L, 2L year when I'm looking for summer associate positions, and my and maybe looking for a full-time position my third year. There's also, the financial aspect. The extra year financially, I could save more to sort of decrease the financial burden law school is going to be. And then there is the emotional side. Like, I got engaged, and we're going to have to think about how is my fiance's job going to work during this. So I had a lot of sort of stuff going on, and I felt like it was the right thing to do to sort of wait another year, apply when I had sort of, had a more robust resume, if you will. Be that as it may, I think one thing that was sort of the saving grace why I've had, as of right now, as much success. And again, I had a very successful cycle last year, so it was very hard to sort of turn down a lot of the schools and offers last year. But if you're going to reapply, if you're thinking about reapplying, you sort of have to have a delta, right? You have to have a change, right? I think one thing that you don't want is you apply 1 year, you go, I don't really like any of the offers. I don't like where I'm at. I'm just going to apply next year, and you're not changed, right? There's nothing new about your new application. I think that's sort of a red flag, right? Because it's all an AdCom is going to do is look at it and go, well, we rejected you last year. You now reapplied this year. You don't have a new LSAT score. You don't have a new GPA. You don't have any new interesting job experience. You're just the same applicant, right? It's, that's not going to help you, right? So what I did was, I wrote a new personal statement. I wrote some addenda that I didn't write the year prior that I think I should have in sort of hindsight. I sort of redesigned sort of my resume to stress some things more than others and flesh some things out more than others. I wrote, more optional essays. So there was a really big change, in my application from this year to last year that sort of made me, like, in my opinion, a fairly, different candidate, which I think, is for the better. And yes, I did write a new personal statement. So I think if you're going to reapply, if you're thinking about reapplying, at the bare minimum, you should definitely write a new personal statement. And I always think that the personal statement just needs to, it sort of needs to tell a story. And I think everyone is sort of, full of interesting stories and interesting experiences. You just have to find the right one. And if you've already written one for a previous cycle, find a new story that tells the admissions committee something about yourself, or a story about how you've grown as a person, or an interesting experience that made you, look at the world, differently. And I think everybody, should be able to find, a couple of those at some point in their life. And they don't need to be crazy sob stories or super dramatic. They need to be real, right? And it's better to be real than to sort of make up a story like that, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yes, awesome. I also just wanted to know how many years you've been out of college.
This is my third year. So I graduated undergrad in, fourth year. I graduated undergrad in 14, and I got my master's in 15, and then I've been working close to 2 years right now.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Awesome. Emily, I think you had asked a similar question. I hope David was able to address your question. If you have follow-up, please just type it into the chat. Next, F.A. asked, EFE, are you still here, and is your mic working?
Hi, yes, my mic is working. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Yes.
All right, so I have a question concerning a retake. So I took the LSAT in December and I plan to retake in June, and I'm just kind of confused on where to start from. I have been going through the curriculum recently, and I don't know if that's the right approach to it, or should I just focus on more prep tests? So that's my question.
So let me so you took the test in June, right?
No,
you're
December.
up a little bit there. If you don't mind repeating the question.
Oh, sure. So I took the LSAT in December, and I didn't get the score I wanted, so I plan to retake in June. And I've been going through the curriculum, and I was just wondering if that's the right approach to like a retake, or should I just focus more on taking more prep tests and just like zeroing in on my weaknesses?
Yeah. So the good thing is the June test is quite a ways away. So I think one thing to do is reflect on where you are with your December score, right? I would say, so say your target score is a 170, right? And you got your December score back, and if it's sort of, I think, sub 160, right? I think starting with the curriculum is a pretty good spot, right? Because there's a lot of, I think that would suggest there are a lot of fundamental, right, things that you can improve on. And take a look at your score breakdown, right? The LSAC sends you, your breakdown, your responses versus the correct responses, so you know which questions you missed, right? And take those questions and see if there's similarities, right? Do you find yourself, man, I missed 3 necessary assumption questions out of the 5 on the test, or I missed the in-out game on this test, or I really struggle with reading comprehension. And I would say that's a really good place to start if you're looking to start from a fundamentals aspect in the core curriculum. If not, right, if say your target score is a 170 and you score a 168, right, then I'd say probably your fundamentals are fine, right? And between now and June, really honing in on taking prep tests and figuring out, okay, what was it about the December test? What did I do that prevented me from scoring my target score? That's something to really stress during blind review and taking practice tests and analyzing those and looking through your blind review process. The nice thing is June is so far away, you can do a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, right? You can kind of go back to, you have enough time to kind of go back through the curriculum. I think the curriculum going, at a healthy pace, takes about probably 6 to 8 weeks to go through, right? And that still puts you, with plenty of time to prep test, right? So, doing both is still an option. So I think to answer your question is it kind of depends on where you were in December relative to where your target score is, and using your December take to then gauge on, okay, is it best to start with the curriculum or is it best to kind of continue with the prep tests? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So next we have Jacob. Jacob asks, did you do any self-study before or after your course with 7Sager? Also, why did you decide to go to grad school before law school?
Oh, yeah. So did I do any self-study prior to 7Sager? Not really. Like I did, I had the Power Score books and I had the Manhattan books. To be perfectly honest, I didn't really get a whole lot out of them. I read them cover to cover, I think maybe twice, like that summer before I took the test. And I really struggled. And I don't know if it was the aspect of it just, I don't know really what wasn't clicking. That was something that, I think 7Sage to me just was a lot better, just fit my personality a lot more. Like, I'm a very visual learner. So I like watching videos. I like listening to explanations, right? Sort of reading it, sometimes I think some of the nuance and inflection is sort of lost on where you should stress certain things, because in sort of a book everything is sort of given equal weight, whereas in a video you can kind of listen to sort of tone and attitude and stuff. And I don't know, that just sort of that to me was a much more effective way to study. It was a lot more interactive, right? Because I could then in the comments section type out an explanation or type out a question, or I had the forums to then go and ask a question to somebody on the community. And you lose that, right? You don't have that option if it's just in just a Power Score book, right? It's what's in the Power Score book, and that's it. So it didn't really fit with what I was sort of looking for. So the answer was technically yes, but to be honest, I don't think I got a lot out of it other than just the basic familiarity with, okay, there's this test called the LSAT. It has a game section, it has a logical reasoning section, and it has a reading comp section. But other than that, I didn't think I learned a whole lot from them. I also, during the 7Sage curriculum, I did supplement, not supplement is not the right word, complement, I guess is better, some of the curriculum with some outside reading. So I bought an Introduction to Logic textbook, which was it actually wasn't too dense, but it was a pretty good book in that it formalized a lot of the ideas that the LSAT tested. And the arguments in the book were a lot more complicated than what you would see on the LSAT. So I felt like if I could do the arguments in that book and proof them out, I felt like I could tackle anything the LSAT gave me. There was another book I bought called Informal Logic by Doug Walton. And it was just like sort of a really interesting book that talked about why certain fallacies are fallacies and how certain fallacies can kind of be corrected in dialogue. And it got me to really think about flaw types in a really interesting way. And that was sort of what I used sort of on the side. I say free time read because I would kind of spend my Sundays, my day off, because I wouldn't want to watch the Chicago Bears lose. So I would read, one of those two books for maybe 30 minutes or 45 minutes a day on a Sunday and sort of just take note and approach things in a little bit more formalistic way. But really the 7Sage curriculum was really the bulk, I think more than sufficient for explaining my score increase and everything. And what was the other question? Why did I get a grad degree?
But just to jump in first, someone's asking what's the name of the first and second books that you read?
Oh yeah, the textbook was called Introduction to Logic by Harry Gensler. It's not really that long. It has some problem sets in it. You could probably buy it used for like $10. Don't buy a new one. Don't. It's not worth more than $10. The second book was Informal Logic: A Pragmatic Approach by Douglas Walton, and same, buy it used for $5, $10. I mean, it's you don't need to spend $40 on this thing. But I thought those were I read some other books as well. Those two by far were the most useful. I read a book about the psychology of logic. I thought it was pretty garbage, so I don't buy that one. And then I read a book, How to Solve It, A New Mathematical Approach, which was written by a Hungarian mathematician in like 1940. And I really like math. I'm pretty good at math. And it sort of, again, approached logic in a mathematical standpoint. And there's a chapter in the book just on arguments by analogy. And I think if you're using that book to help you study for the LSAT, I'd say that's the only valuable chapter in that book that's most relevant to the LSAT, because it made me look at arguments by analogy in a totally different way. But again, I mean, I don't know if I'd recommend buying it or reading the whole thing. But definitely those first two books I think are pretty good. If you're looking for a more formal, more complicated, I guess, stuff than the LSAT's going to throw at you. But I don't think they're necessary, but they're interesting outside reading.
Great. Thanks, David. And okay, so the other question was, why did you decide to go to grad school before law school? And what did you study in grad school?
I studied tax. So I'm a CPA, and I needed my hours to be a licensed CPA. And so my undergrad institution offers a 1-year Master's of Accounting program. And so I stayed and did that so I could get my the 150 credit hours to sit for the CPA test. And while I was in there, I focused my studies on federal tax. I plan on studying tax law as of right now. That's sort of my ambition, to study tax law in law school. And my understanding and talking with people in the profession, that the CPA and the more business side of understanding how the tax code works is far more useful than, say, a tax LLM. So I decided to go that route as opposed to maybe the tax LLM route after law school. Like NYU's tax LLM is probably the best tax LLM in the country. But I decided to say, well, I don't know if I want to do that, but I'll stay at my undergrad. My undergrad institution's a top 10 accounting program, so it's a very reputable accounting school. And I just was like, well, I'm already here. I was maybe planning on getting a tax LLM after law school anyway, but since I'm already here, might as well do it. I didn't have to take the GMAT or anything, so I got auto accepted, and I'm like, yeah, why not? Another year to watch our terrible football team.
Okay, so this next question is something that you had touched upon earlier, but and this comes from Emily, whose mic is not working. She says, so how did you have time to do all of the studying that you were describing when you were answering Tyler's question, your blind review process? So how did you have time to do all of this? Were you, if I recall correctly, you weren't working while you were studying, right?
Yes, that's correct. I was not working. So I took time off to study, which I know is a luxury that not a lot of people can do. I was sort of lucky enough to be in a position where I had a family member that had a health issue, and so while she was recovering, I moved in with her to take care of her, and so I didn't have so I was doing that, and then I just had enough time to study for the LSAT. I would say if you're working full time, or again, it kind of goes back to, I think it was Jack's question. Spending, budgeting out your day. Like, if you're working full time, I'd say find a 2-hour chunk of time after work. Or some people are morning people, can do it before work. I am not one of those people. I have to get my sleep. Find a 2-hour chunk of your day and use that as your LSAT time. Or use an hour of your lunch or something like that, or 45 minutes of your lunch break. One thing that I sort of have had the luxury of doing is being a CPA is I see people studying for the CPA exam. And so one thing I've kind of been able to do in the past year or so is look at, okay, how are my peers studying for their test, right, as they work full time? And most of them say, well, I take out, a set of time out of my day during the week, 2 hours, and that's my CPA time, right? And I think that's analogous to say, okay, this is my LSAT time. And during the weekend, they hit it a little bit harder. If you're working full time, I think you just have to be able to take your test probably during the weekend, because it takes about 4 hours to take a practice test, and you probably don't have that 4-hour chunk of time during the week, right? So your Saturdays and Sundays are going to be your valuable time, and then the Monday through maybe Friday is sort of your blind review time, right? Your Monday through Thursday, your blind review time. So when I was describing my my blind review schedule, outside of Monday, when I was taking the actual full-time test, which was 4 hours, I would say I was studying no more than maybe 3 hours a day. kind of taking a step back and thinking about it. So I think it would have been doable with a full-time schedule. It would have been hard and it would have been tiring and frustrating, but I think it would have definitely been doable. And I would have also utilized my weekends a little bit differently. So I would have maybe, I would have taken that exam on a Saturday instead of maybe the Monday, and then used my weekdays for my blind review a little bit more. But yeah, I think my schedule is definitely can be tweaked a little bit to fit a full-time schedule without that much compromise. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, that definitely makes sense to me. So on that note, Rachel, you had mentioned something that I thought was really great, and if you're still here, I would like for you to tell everyone. Rachel said in response to managing time and finding the motivation to study, she said, my biggest help is getting dressed, different clothes, even if it's in the middle of the day, and then going to a separate place with my phone on Do Not Disturb. It helps me a lot in getting in a different state of mind. I really like that. It's very practical. It's nothing like earth-shattering, but I think it's small, but I think it really helps a lot. It makes a big difference. I love the flight mode. Some people, I don't think everyone knows that your phone has like a flight mode option. I love the flight mode option. It's people got on just fine without cell phones forever, right? So now that you have a cell phone, you don't like. I can't stand like just the constant buzz and the light and whatever. So I love putting myself on flight mode. And then you're in control, right? Like when you actually want to engage, you just unflight mode it, and then a torrent of like texts or like whatever random unsolicited.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm gonna kind of take it back to the CPA exam, is because I think it's pretty analogous to the LSAT in that respect too, and that I had a lot of my classmates, spend time before they started their jobs to take and pass the CPA exam, and I found the ones that were really struggling with the CPA exam are the ones that would, quote unquote, I studied 4 hours a day, but then you go study with them and, they're checking their phone every 5 minutes. They're, browsing the internet every 15 minutes. And so maybe time-wise from when they entered the library to when they left is 4 hours, but the actual study time was probably, 45 minutes. And, it was something I just kind of observed, like the correlation right there, but the correlation between, the procrastination, right, of being on your phone and whatever. So when I was studying, I would keep my phone right in the other room or something like that. I would have my laptop out when I was doing the timed exams, only because I would use the 7Sager proctor, but I'd have my laptop like facing the other way on the other side of the room. So it's like I couldn't even if I wanted to, I'd have to like totally get out of my chair and like go over and walk to it if I was going to procrastinate. And so it was a really good good way for me to like just not sort of waste time on my phone or something. Like I'd have the TV off, phone in the bedroom, laptop on the other side of the room, and I would just have the papers in front of me. And then when it was time to type out an explanation, I'd bring my laptop back over, I'd turn the internet off, and I'd type out something on Microsoft Word and then copy paste it into a comment at the end of it, sort of at the end of my day. And I felt like that was that helped me really use my time very, very effectively.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so do you want to answer your anonymous question and then?
Yeah, so I'll do the anonymous question. So this person is taking the exam in February. So I'm just I'm reading the question right now. So this person is taking the exam in February and just starting to prep test this Saturday. Is this sufficient time? I know it may vary person to person to do a prep test a week and blind review schedule and try to squeeze in question types throughout the day. This person also works full-time 9 to 5. So to answer this person's question, whether taking the February test and, just starting to take a prep test this Saturday, I'd say, is it sufficient? I mean, it could be, right? I mean, you're going to sort of know the answer once you take that first exam. and depending on what your practice score is, or excuse me, depending on what your target score is, excuse me. If your target score is a 170 and you take your first prep test and it's, a 150, which is, a very common diagnostic score, to go from a 150 to a 170 in just under 2 months, very hard to do. Not, I'm not going to say it has been done before, but by very few people, right? So it's something to sort of evaluate, expectations. And one sort of common theme of my webinar that I did a little bit over a year ago was a huge mistake in my early prep was not being clear with my expectations, right? Because had I been objective about where I was prep testing and sort of where I was from a fundamental aspect of, did I just understand what it meant to weaken an argument? Did I understand what a necessary assumption was? Did I know what a grouping game was? Where I was, right? I thought I did. I was like, yeah, of course I do. I'm going to go in there and score a 172 like no one's business, and that's going to be the end of it. But had I taken a step back and looked at the data, looked at my prep tests, looked at the things I was actually struggling with, I should have been able to see like, absolutely no, I wasn't, and I should not have been surprised that I scored, 9-10 points lower than I thought was my potential, right? The first time I took the LSAT. And that was after studying for most of that summer. I really started hitting the books hard that June to take the September test. So that was June, July, August, the September test at the end of September. That was 3.5, 4 months of study, right? That, I made zero improvement because I was kind of doing it the sort of wrong way. So you got to be honest with yourself to sort of know the answer to that question, whether it's sufficient or not. But if you're going to be taking the February test, right, chances are you're not going to be applying to law school until the next cycle anyway, right? This next year. I mean, the June test, is still an option, right? The September test is still an option. The December test are still options. And I want to say the LSAC is, yeah. And so if those are options for you, don't feel like you have to rush into it with the February test, I think the LSAC, I don't know when they're going to start offering the more testing windows. I don't know if it's this year or the following year, but don't feel like you need to lock yourself into February when June, September, and December are very real and very, very good options still for the following cycle, because you're most likely going to be applying to that cycle anyway. So I hope that answered your question.
Great, thanks, David.
Yeah.
So Matthew, you asked the question some time ago. Do you think the modern tests and those in PT 70s through 80s are different or harder than the ones pre-70? I feel like the LR sections in general are much harder. Any thoughts on this idea? Maybe it's not true, I'm just hitting fatigue. And related to that, Janice said, Janice asked, did you take all the prep tests before June 2016? If not, how many did you take, and which prep test number did you start with?
Yeah, so I'll start with the latter question. So I took a lot. I'm going to say 40 something, 50 something. And I started with the June 2007 test as my diagnostic, quote unquote diagnostic. I didn't really take a diagnostic because I had sort of studied a little bit before I took it. But I took pretty much, let me see, the June 2007 test, and I took prep test 35 all the way through like 75 or 6 or whatever it was, with maybe 1 or 2 tests that I sort of, out of my very few that I had that were fresh, I think I saved 1 or 2 of them just in case I wanted to retake in September. But yeah, I took, so what would that have been? That would have been like around 40. Yeah, I'd say 40 or 50. And that's not even including retakes, because I retook a huge chunk of those too. So maybe even more when you count the just total number of times I sat down and took a 5-section exam. So a lot. To answer the other question, whether I think the 70s and 80s are harder, I don't think they're harder, but I think they're different. And I think they're different for just sort of employee turnover reasons. I mean, just a person who is writing test questions for the LSAC in 1991 probably isn't there anymore, right? So people get new jobs, they get new editors, they get new psychometricians. So I think there's definitely, an element to the test that's dependent on who's there working at the LSAC right now. But are they harder? No, I don't think they're harder. Certainly the games, I think, are the most, maybe the easiest section to see how it's a little bit different, because there's the rule substitution question that crept its way in from, I think it was like 65 or 67 or whenever that question started. As well as sort of the propensity for more modern tests to occasionally throw in kind of a wonky game. But at the end of the day, they're still testing the same types of inferences, right? They're just asking it, and they're presenting the game board in just a different manner. But they're the same kinds of things that the LSAT has always tested. When it comes to logical reasoning, has there been a little bit more of a sort of blurriness between, what is a sufficient assumption and what is a necessary assumption? I think so, a little bit. I think on a lot more recent tests, you find the answers to necessary assumption questions, I think, tend to be closer to the sufficient side than necessary, but, they're still necessary, right? So it just is a little bit, tweaking your sort of mindset to approaching, some sections to sort of know that and sort of knowing the patterns. But at the end of the day, they're a little bit different, but I wouldn't say they're harder.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I don't think they're harder. Plus, they're all, it's
they're all gutted.
Anyway,
they analyze every word of those tests, and they also have a mechanism to challenge questions. And I don't know if anyone has ever written to the LSAC about challenging a question. They send you a freaking book back about why you're wrong and they're right. So they maybe it's confirmation bias, right? Maybe it's also, oh my God, guys, we can't admit that we're wrong on this question, so we're just going to throw in the kitchen sink on our explanation. But they present. I think it's a pretty amazing quality. I think it's kind of amazing how the test for so long, from I think prep test 1 is like the June 1991 exam, right? Just to put that in perspective, the Soviet Union still existed in June 1991, and from then to now, right? It's a very consistent test, and I think that's kind of an amazing feat. Like when I kind of sit back and think about it, for how long the test has been around.
Yeah, I agree, especially with the level of rigor. The questions. Yeah. Okay, so we have just about 5 minutes left for this AMA/Q&A, and I think we have 2 questions. Nicholas asked, how do you identify the questions you should skip? I suppose maybe take this for LR.
Yeah. So the questions I should skip for LR, pretty much it was my 1 minute standard. So I would my sort of reading speed was, for an average LR question, I could read the paragraph of information and then all 5 answer choices, and pretty consistently that was a minute of my time. And if I found that by answer choice E I wasn't confident enough to put an answer down, I would skip it. And that was my strategy. So what that sort of did was, I got eyes on every single question in 25 minutes. Didn't mean I answered every question in 25 minutes, because I was skipping questions still. But I had eyes on every question in 25 minutes, and I would spend the remaining 10 minutes going back to the ones I skipped, right? And that was a pretty comforting strategy. It sounds kind of daunting and kind of scary, like, oh my God, 25 questions, 25 minutes. But I'm not a particularly fast reader. And the comforting thought was, it didn't matter, right? I was not going to run out of time, right? Because if putting eyes on 25 questions in 25 minutes meant that you're going to, by definition, have 10 minutes to look at the questions you skipped, right? And so I would much rather, if I'm going to run out of time, I'm going to run out of time on a question that I skipped and have a higher chance of missing than I'm spending all of this time up front and all of a sudden the 5-minute mark is called and I'm on question 21 and I have to rush through the final 5 questions or final 4 questions and miss 3 of them, and I maybe should have gotten those right. I'd much rather miss 3 questions that I tried and just couldn't figure out, as opposed to missing maybe 4 questions that I just didn't have enough time to even give them a shot, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I always thought the probabilities worked out on that by having a really rigorous timing strategy,
Right.
or something like that.
Yeah. Plus, you're in control. You get to choose which questions you want to miss versus the test. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we have accounts fan number 1.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Fun. I like the name.
Hey. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so hey, this is George, by the way, JY from Accounts.
How you doing, George?
Pretty good. Yeah, so basically, I have a full offer from UCLA coming through. And I'm wondering, since I want to become a plaintiff's attorney and work as a trial lawyer, I'm wondering, is it better to try to shoot the T14, like probably a sticker or a very little scholarship, or to try to go for UCLA, a full tuition scholarship? Like, what's your view on that? What are your thoughts, both of you, actually?
So my viewpoint on the
Sorry, before you get started, I just want to make sure everyone heard that question. The question was sticker on T14 or sticker or close to sticker on T14, or something like full scholarship on UCLA. Right?
Yeah. So let's lump like UCLA, Texas Austin, WashU, like the sort of 16 to 13 or 16 to 15 kind of ranked schools together, versus say a sticker or close to sticker at top 14. One nice thing about the top 14, and I'm sure this is also true of not top 14 schools, is they have pretty generous loan repayment assistance programs, right? So, I think it's like most of them, if you're not making, $100,000 a year for XYZ number of years after law school, which, a defense attorney, for not very good reasons, most likely aren't making that. If you're sort of a government defense attorney or something, schools will help you out there, right? So kind of food for thought on that issue if you're public interest minded, or sort of defense attorney or sort of low paying government jobs, but that's what you want to do. But if your end goal is say a big law job, and your trade-off is between say a sticker at a top 14 school versus a full ride to UCLA, I mean, it depends on, do you have ties to UCLA? Do you have ties to the California market? Do you network in the California market? My opinion is I would lean more towards the sticker at the top 14 school, simply because it gives you a lot of flexibility market-wise, and I think that's valuable. And I think that that value is something worthwhile, because something like WashU, that places very, very well in the St. Louis market, but that's about it. It places semi-decently in Illinois and kind of semi-decently throughout the rest of the Kansas market or the Missouri markets. You're kind of locked down to that region, and if that's where you want to work and practice and raise a family, then yeah, it's hard to say that WashU at full tuition is not your best option, right? It probably is. But if you're like, well, I kind of want the freedom, the flexibility to make lateral moves in big markets, I think having a top 14 job is something that, or excuse me, having a top 14 degree, even at sticker, is worthwhile. And if you're working a big law job in a big market, you're going to get paid a lot of money, and you're going to have the liquidity and the funds if managed correctly to pay it off. Yeah, I mean, you're making loan payments, but I think the aversion to debt is something I find really interesting, because when you go to like top law school forums, there's such a debt averse mindset, And I think that's prudent, and I think it's frugal, which is, I'm an accountant, right? I'm by definition a frugal guy. But there's a big bias to the kinds of people that are on Top Law School Forum. The people on Top Law School Forum are people that are applying to law school, so they don't actually have law school student loans yet, or they're in the middle, or they're actually in law school right now. Or they're recent graduates, like maybe a few years out. Go, talk to people who are maybe a few years out if you can, and talk about their debt load and how they manage it. But also find the people who are 15, 20, 30 years out of law school and ask them how they manage their debt load. So I think you're going to find the answer. You're going to find the recent graduates much more pessimistic on the debt load because they're paying their debt off right now. And they're like, oh my God, this sucks. So much of my paycheck is going to taxes and law school debt. And I'm living in New York City or Washington, D.C., two of the most expensive places on the planet. This sucks. But if you talk to, a person 15, 20 years from now who's made lateral moves, who's maybe moved up to partner, who has maybe switched jobs a few times, has paid off their law school debt, I think you're going to find the person like that is going to say, yeah, I think going to a top 13 school, even at sticker, was a really wise option for their career despite the debt load. Now, the question of what about sticker price at a non-top 14 school, then you got to really think about the regionality of the market and stuff. But in our example, UCLA full ride versus say Cornell at sticker, I don't know. I mean, I think the Cornell degree gives you a lot more flexibility to pay that off, or excuse me, a lot of flexibility market-wise. And I don't think you're going to have a huge time paying it off if you're big law focused. And if you're more public interest focused, it has a very, very good LRAP program that, you can take advantage of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I guess I'll just emphasize looking into loan repayment programs that the different schools offer, different T14 schools offer. Depending on which ones you get into, I hope you get into all of them. In which case you'll have a ton of research to do. But for the ones that you get into, I'd highly encourage you to look in close detail at their loan repayment programs because they are very different. Okay, some of them are incredibly lenient. There tends to be a correlation. The higher ranked school you are, the better your loan repayment, the more lenient the loan repayment program is, right? So it's kind of like a winner take all situation. Like if you win, you really win. But yeah, and also their employment statistics, really dig into the employment statistics. I think those are the two factors that, depending on how you turn the dial on those factors, the outcome will differ. But yeah, I think everything David said was right. And I hope that answers your question.
I had one quick follow up to the private question about that I can address real quick. That the LSAT taking away the cap, right? The 2 takes in 3 years. Yes, the cap is gone. I believe that's effective now, right?
Yeah,
it's now
3 takes in 2 years, and it's been effective for 2 administrations, I think.
Yeah, so the old cap was 3 takes in 2 years, and so now it's unlimited, right? You can take the test an unlimited number of times, in any number of period of times. But it would be that as it may, I think. I think there's still, for better or for worse, I think once you're into the 4th, 5th take, then you're getting into, you probably need to write an addendum and kind of explain that. But it shouldn't, affect you. For just pure incentive wise, for rankings and everything, only the highest score matters. But I think there's a sort of a psychology of, well, when you're taking the test 4 or 5, 6 times, that might be frowned upon. But this is sort of the first year that the window, the limited testing window doesn't exist anymore. So we'll kind of see what schools actually do. Yeah. Like NYU, for example, I'll do a shout out to them. On their website, they're like, hey, we average scores, and you need to write an addendum and if you don't, we're going to average your score. I Case 101, did not write an addendum, and got accepted to NYU. And my average score would not have been, I think would have been under their 25th percentile. So they didn't do that for me. So, I think it's a case in point of actions speak louder than words, so they have every incentive to take the highest score, no matter how many times you take it. But, food for thought.
Yeah, I think we just have to wait and see what the schools do. I'm skeptical that despite what they say, which is kind of just a signal to the applicants, but what they actually do is determined by, I think a lot driven by U.S. News and what the ABA, what they have to report to the ABA. So unless one of those two organizations changes how they view the LSAT in admissions, I'm not sure why the schools would change what they're doing.
They have no reason to care, right? I mean, it's if the rank, at one point the rankings, at one point the schools cared about multiple takes because the rankings averaged the scores, right? Yeah. So you saw, right, schools reflect that in because the rankings average scores, the law schools average scores, and then in like 2007 or 2008 or whenever it was, when the U.S. News was like, we don't care about average scores, you saw the schools reply in kind, right? Okay, we don't care about average scores anymore. So very much so the actions of the schools reflect that, yeah, they're very ranking conscious. And, if they have think about the most extreme scenario. They have a person that's a 180 LSAT. Say they took the test one time and got a 126, and then took the test the second time and got a 180. They're not going to care about that 126 at all, right? Yeah. That's an extreme example that I doubt has ever happened in the history of the test, but I think it's true even for more modest score drops. Like I think a 160 versus a 175. The 175 puts you at 70. I think that's the 75th percentile
everywhere. I think
at every law school, right? They're not going to. They have no reason to care about that 160 because from a ranking standpoint, you're hitting their 75th percentile. Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter what your average is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks so much for your time, David, and everyone else who's here as well. Thank you so much. So before David, I'll let you go. Will you let people know how to get in touch with you if they want?
Yeah, so for sure. So again, I'm accounts playable on the 7Sager forums. And if you want to get in touch with me, shoot me a message in my inbox. I check my 7Sager inbox a couple times a day. I think that's the most efficient way to get in touch with me. And if you didn't ask a question today, or if for some reason we didn't answer your question, shoot the question to me, and I'm more than happy to answer. I'm a pretty approachable guy. I want to answer everyone's questions and everything. So if for whatever reason we didn't get to your question, or if just say 5 minutes after the call's ended, you just come up with a question, and you're like, man, I wish I asked it, shoot me a message on the inbox on 7Sager. Again, I'm accounts playable, and I'll try to get back to you within a day or so. I can't stress enough how much the 7Sager just community and the course and JY and everybody here really helped me through my LSAT journey. And it's quite an amazing company and quite an amazing website. And take advantage of it, right? Take advantage of every resource you have. Just the community, the blind review calls, the videos, the core curriculum, me, the other sages that do a fantastic job. There's a lot of really good stuff on here that is just perfect for anyone at any stage in their prep to improve their score. So with that, I'm going to give it back to JY. But really excellent questions today, and I wish everyone the best of luck with their LSAT journey and prep going forward.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much, David. And you've certainly given back a lot. If you guys haven't seen David's other webinar, just go to the webinar section and you'll find it. And David, you have to let us know in a few months which schools you've gotten into, what you'll decide, which one you'll decide to attend.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll keep everybody updated on that. I'll probably make a post in the forum in a few months once I make a decision and hear back. But right now I'm very happy. I'm very happy with my acceptances and everything so far this cycle. So I think I'm optimistic. And again, just to kind of reiterate the 7Sage stuff, when I first started studying for the LSAT, I was like, I would have been happy to go. I would have been happy with sort of my alma mater law school, which was a great law school. But then once I found the 7Sage site and did research on just law school admissions, I'm like, there's every opportunity to sort of improve if you sort of study the right way. And my webinar, that I did a year ago from this October, really focuses on, all right, how to study the right way for the LSAT. So if you're just starting your LSAT sort of journey, or even if you're well in it, I think it's worthwhile to watch just for general tips. I spend a lot of the webinar going through just mistakes I made and like how to, if I were to do it again, just like how would I do things differently? And I think it's valuable for a lot of reasons. But that might be the most important one. So if you haven't watched it already, I really much encourage people to watch it, because it's just sort of my journey and bumps and things I would have done differently, and things that worked and things that didn't work, and considerations to have for your prep. So I think that answers is a good sort of additional information for a lot of questions that were asked today. Really good, like further information, like more detailed for a lot of those questions. So just kind of food for thought if you have extra time and want to watch a webinar or something.
Well, thank you so much, David.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, JY. Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah. And look forward to hearing more from you.
Yeah, for sure. We'll keep in touch.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you.